Alright, boys. Today we're gonna do a video about jungling. This is primarily pertaining to doing objectives. I see a lot of themes, and I get a lot of questions from players about how to properly play for the early objectives, mainly the early dragon and early herald. Because depending on the comp that you're running, it's really important to either get these or really delay them. And I want to kind of showcase to what extent that really is affected, and now players can really think about the opportunities that they have and how to properly assess and understand what they need to do to really take advantage of the comp that they have into the objectives that they are doing. So here we have a very strong scaling comp on the red side. Okay, and we have a very early aggro comp with a bit of uh hyper with a hyper carry. But they're mainly an aggro comp using Renekton, Trundle, and Ahri to get priorities on the map and being able to move and be stronger in the early stages of the game until around, I'd say, 20 minutes when two items start to really hit. Then they start falling off, and post three items, they're Renekton's not a champion. Trundle's gonna be an effective champion, but it can't play against the enemy team. Ahri's not a champion. She's a wave pushing bot, and Severe will be a champion, but she has no protection and no real survivability outside of Yumi. So they're not really a scaling comp. They're like a very strong aggro comp with capabilities for late game given Sivir. But they're not a true scaling comp, unlike the red team, which not only has Twitch and Sona, which is an amazingly strong uh, late game pair. They also have Ornn for augments. Each one of them is around 1k to 1.5k gold, depending on the item and counting the buffs that Ornn itself receives from each augment. They have Udyr, scales extremely well, especially with the rework. Uh, Maxing R and W, he becomes basically unkillable, is super annoying, takes objectives really fast, and deals a lot of damage both to tanks and squishies, and AD carries just cannot manage to deal with him properly without active CC, which he can somewhat negate. So he's extremely good in this kind of composition. Anivia also very good into the late game, and as a very good added bonus, has a lot of zone control that this team really appreciates. Not only because Ornn and Udyr have some level of zone control, but as well as Twitch being able to more freely move around the terrain that he has available, given the circumstances of the front line that he has, is extremely powerful. So now that we understand what the comps want to do, we have to understand what each jungler wants to do. We're going to start by Trundle because part of the reality of being a scaly jungler, in the sense of Udyr, is that you're mostly reactive. Because you yourself don't want to make a play, you want to impede the enemies of properly making plays, right? So you want to make enemies take dragons and heralds later. You want to make enemies uh, do ineffective ganks and gain time for your laners to properly get to the items that they want. If you can make a positive impact on the game with a kill or an assist without losing anything, that's obviously amazing, especially for scaling comps. But if you go even, you also do not mind at all. On the blue side, though, it's very different. Trundle, in this situation of the game, needs to get his laners ahead. Top needs to be at least 2 kills and I'd say 30 CS ahead of Ward by 20 minutes. And Eevee and Ori are going to be just pushing, but it would be really nice if if Ari could get ahead. Uh, Trundle in itself getting ahead is nice, but not really much of a big deal. Allows him to get a bit more control of this of the terrain in the zones once comes into the mid game, where he can like play around this area more easily, especially with such a strong pushing bot. But he himself doesn't need to be extremely far ahead to generally be a positioned player in the game at 2 items. He effectively doesn't get better with items. He just gets slightly more tanky. He doesn't really get true bonus from items because he's just a meat stick. He's strong on the base stats that he has and not much more than that. So he doesn't really need to get stronger because it won't really change that much towards him. But on the bot lane is a very weird dynamic because you really want your Sivir to be stronger. Sivir has a really hard matchup against Ziggs, against Twitch, sorry, and no one on the blue team can effectively really reach him or punish him once he opens, especially with this composition. So the reality is Trundle needs to really play very hard for bot lane, and he has to hope that Isernectin can manage the lead that he needs. He can also decide not to play for bot lane, but what's gonna end up happening is even if Renekton, gets this lead and bot goes even, he will lose the game. Because Twitch will just reach a point where he cannot be answered. Even if Renekton has a lot of items under his belt, Twitch can just deal between Twitch and Anivia, it can be easily dealt with. So having this in mind, it's a very good understanding that Trundle needs to play for the strongest early win conditions that there exist in the game. So he can the best and strongest win condition that exists in the game is the Dragon Soul, Elder, Baron. These are true in-game win conditions. You can also do good play. I'm gonna put it as a separate individual thing because we can also talk about it a bit. But good play is also really a way that you can win without reaching any of the other ones. But the different in nature between these two is that this is a lot easier to guarantee than this, because this requires a extremely good level of play in the sense that like every decision needs to be perfect, needs to be met, needs to be badly answered, or at least neutralizingly answered by the enemy composition to be effective, and you like have to win slowly, and you're still on a timer that like more than 25 minutes into the game, if you're not 7k with at least inhibitors down, at least like 2 inhibitors down, you're in a very hard game. Okay, so if you don't meet the criteria of like being 7k gold ahead with this comp and 2 inhibitors down by 25, you're in a really shitty spot. And it doesn't really matter how perfectly you play. If the enemies are just decent, they will get to you. They will just flat out win. With Dragon Soul, Elder, and Baron, you become so unimaginably strong, and you have so much more value in terms of just raw power, that those idealisms of late game can still apply, but they apply very little. Like if the blue team gets Herald at 40 minutes, it would still be a close fight, but it'd be really hard for the red team to win. Oh, and but if both teams are at 40 minutes and blue team doesn't have either, Soul, Elder, or Baron, it's just impossible for them to win. And even if they have Baron and Soul, depending on the Soul, it's still very unlikely for them to win. Elder is like the number one value in fight for late game. I'd say Soul is number two and Baron is number three. Because although Baron gives a lot of stats, the harsh reality of Baron is that it's a pushing bot. It's a goal generating objective towards structures, while Elder and Dragon are Elder is just too strong at what it does. B- the burning and the max HP execution is just too powerful to just leave unattended. It is end gaming. One ace when Elder is up is all a team needs to completely just win the game. And it's very easy to ace someone once you get Elder. The other one is Dragon Soul. And Dragon Soul is above Baron because although Baron is really powerful, it's limited. And the power that it has, it's not as big as something that like Elder. Elder is also limited in the time that it runs, but it's so inherently powerful that it doesn't matter. Baron is powerful, but it's not as powerful. Some souls can even outshine Baron in the effectiveness they have during the game because of it. So souls like uh Infernal, Mountain, which is probably the better soul in the game, and what's the other one called? The X-Tech one? X-Tech one is also pretty decent. But mainly, you want to always prioritize Dragon Soul over any other objective. You can make the argument if it's a Cloud Soul that you like, you should go for Baron. That's one of the few caveats to the situations. Like you can prefer, depending on your comp, to go for Baron over Dragon Soul. That's one of the only situations where that's genuinely applicable. Any other call, go for Baron, go for Dragon. You'll be a lot more ahead. But this somewhat entails what the blue team want to do, right? And it also entails what the red team wants to do. Red team either want to get dragons to delay the game as much as possible because they can hold until Elder, because it's the only thing that can really, dampen them and really uh, cause them to lose the game because the enemy comp can't. Or they want to make sure that the blue team can't get these objectives before their timers come online, right? So if the enemy team can't do Dragon Soul, right, which is the first major objective that you're going to get, if they can't go for Dragon Soul at, let's say, 22 minutes, they're fine. It's an immediate win. If they can make so Dragon Soul is only taken or is only to be contested at 30 minutes or more or 25 minutes or more, that's a complete win for them. Because at that point, they don't care. They already win it. So the Dragon Soul is never going to be the opponents. And because they're the stronger, more effective comp, they have a lot more pushing power. And this notion of hierarchy kind of gets shifted into the good play aspect, which is going to be in quotations here, right? But if the red team get even, it's a lot easier for them to end the game and play of fights, play on sieges, make pressure in the opponents compared to the blue team. And that's kind of the idea of what you need to have here and that you need to understand as a jungler on both sides to understand what you want to do. As a good example of this, Trundle wants to create opportunities. So he wants to create opportunities to make sure that he takes dragon or gold as fast and effectively as possible. And it's very detrimental that enemies take dragons for them. So they want to get soul as fast as possible. They have to take soul between the minute 20 and minute 30. Which means that they need to get, if not all of the dragons, at least four of them. I mean, they always have to take four of them, but they can give one of the dragons if they deem necessary for gold purposes. It's a rather specific situation, but given that you have between 20 and 30 and it's a 5-minute spawn per each, it means that in total, you take 20 minutes to take dragon, right? It spawns at 5 minutes to begin with. So if you take it at 5 minutes, it goes to 10, then it goes to 15, then it goes to 20, then 25, and then 30, right? They need of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 opportunities, they need 4 of them. It's very rare that you do dragon immediately on spawn. Sometimes you need a bit less, sometimes you need a bit more, sometimes you want to play for tempo, or there's something in the map that you did or want to do to affect the enemy composition that will make it so it's less likely for you to do that dragon immediately, right? So the skill kind of changes a bit here and there towards that understanding. The situation that I'm describing still somewhat applies, where you want to make sure you get 4 out of these 5 available before the timer runs out. And that's what Trundle wants to play for. Now, E has a very strong pushing bot side. Amazing. This makes contention on the dragon a lot easier. E is a more slower and clearer, so Udyr will have prio into the river areas earlier, but you can play with this towards his advantage, given that he has 2 pushing lanes. Okay, so what Trundle should ought to do is look for opportunities on the map that he believes are beneficial for him, either being clearing from bot side. I'm gonna put the camps order, okay, just to as a baseline of what Trundle usually does. He doesn't really like to full clear, so this would be a very natural path that he would take, where he plays to basically protect and punish the enemy bot lane. It's very likely that this bot lane won't die. Okay, they shouldn't. They should never die to a situation like this. The only way they can die is if they feel over aggressive and Udyr himself tries to make a play and Trundle responds to it. But that's something that Trundle can play for. He doesn't want this bot lane to go behind since it's one of his primary carries, and it's what's majorly controlling the river for him. So his best option here is to play for bot lane in accordance to what Udyr wants to do, so that he can secure the first 2 dragons, or at least the first dragon. Once securing the first dragon, he can then play more accordingly towards the map for the next 5 minutes, mainly playing for Herald to give an extra bonus to Renekton, since Sari still gets Hazard mid prio. What is very natural to happen, let me just get a support. So now we understand that what Trundle wants to do. He wants to play for his carries, make sure that Sivir and Yuumi have a free lane, or at least try to make as much pressure as possible to delay Twitch and Sona. On the same time, he wants to make sure that Udyr can't impact that lane, since it's the most relevant lane to Trundle, and he doesn't also want the dragons to be in Udyr's control. So, in this style of play, the main players on the bot side, so Trundle, Ahri, Sivir, and Yuumi, need to be very specific on how to control vision in this side of the jungle. It's not easy, but given that both units have push, after first back around 4 minutes, I think 4 minutes is the best back timer that these teams can have, especially because Sivir can cheer recall into this lane, would allow them to control the vision early into the game towards the first spawn. Even if Trundle post rotation, post first clear goes to top side, once he finishes is clear, he'll still have the presence and the safety to play with this, especially due to his Ahri and Sivir Yuumi. So playing into getting vision deep, making sure Udyr is at bay, will completely make you take dragon with no issues. What are the dangers dangers of doing something like this? Well, while it is nice to do a cheater recall, return, push lane, and go ward into dragon, it is somewhat dangerous, and you have to, mentally prepared for the enemies to lose waves to go contest you, because that's the only thing they can really do. With your and the red team, knowing that they have to scale, also understand that they can't give dragons. And the best one to truly delay is the first one. You can make arguments depending on the game and depending on comps that the second and third ones are a bit more important and can be more easily contested. I I agree with that, depending on the comp and the situation. That is true. You should always contest the one that you feel is the safest. But something that happens, especially with the first one, is that the tempo on which the first dragon is killed sets the tempo to the rest of the other dragons. So delaying the first dragon is also always something extremely beneficial for the scaling composition. Because it immensely reduces the time that this happens. Because if they can imagine, for example, that you know Trundle does his first rotation, ends at around 3:30, puts a ward, recalls, goes back into his jungle, full clears properly into bot side, gets level 5. It's around 5:30 in the map, right? 5 minutes and 30. And he wants to play for Dragon. If he starts immediately doing Dragon, no opposition at 5:30, he ends it at 6, so Dragon spawns at 11, right? So he ends at 6. I'm giving a general rule of thumb, but okay. So he spawns at 6. 5 minutes already with a dragon. Depending on the dragon, can be very effective. Especially depending on the map is moving or the map is playing out, it creates a situation where Trundle is in a lot of control of the game. He basically got his first objective already secured. His next is within tempo, so he's completely fine. He's still, within his metrics to get 4 by 30. And the red team is in a very big predicament because now they might want to give, the second dragon because it's really hard to contest given their composition, and they might want to play for the 16 one that's going to spawn. But this is also too early for them to effectively fight such a comp. So they have two options. Either they suicide, trying to make a play so that the enemy doesn't go into 3 dragons versus no dragon, and then at 21 minutes, the game is being decided on Soul. Or they give it and effectively say, okay, we'll give you the dragon and we know we win at 21, which might not even be the case, but it's that dangerous for them. Or they can maybe even go for, okay, we'll give you soul, but we take Baron so we can then play at Elder at 26, which again isn't that great for them either. So between the first and second dragon is where the red team want to be the most effective at playing this game. They want to create a situation where the timer at which the aggro offensive team is getting these massive objectives is as delayed as possible. Because let's, for example, count that instead of 5:30, Trundle can't actually do dragon right now. Bot lane is the red team actually has push. Udyr's in the bot side, and Anivia is hitting 6 and has already gotten push onto Ari to at least enough that she can she can clear the wave and effectively rotate into a 4v4 in the early game. Twitch doesn't really want to fight, but if he can stop Sivir and Yumi from going in, Trundle has to either stay in his jungle looking at nothing until laners go back into his lane and let his team push out, which always wastes time, at least 1 minute, or he might decide that he doesn't want to lose, XP looking at nothing and go into his own jungle as a response to keep farming and keep doing his rotation from top to bottom. But what ends up happening is that the next opportunity that he has to effectively do Dragon now goes to 8 minutes. And at 8 minutes, it's starting to get late. It's starting to be a bit scarier for him to effectively play the game, because at 8 minutes we can see already some items coming up and being a bit, in components, starting to get a bit stronger. It's still early game, so blue side is completely winning and completely zoning if they played correctly, and if red team also played correctly. Like, if both teams are the same, blue team still has the advantage in these minutes of the game. But the next dragon is going to be at 13. It's always a few seconds in disparity, like over time it gains a minute, but so they do 13 now, so they do, let's say, 19 on the next one, right? But this is already a very huge difference to what we had before. Before, it was around, let's say, 3 minutes, 4 minutes of difference to this. And if the enemies have made some time and created tempo here as well, like, it can be much bigger, which prompts the soul fight onto 24 or 25 minutes, which is very near the golden minutes that they want to be at. So this is a game between understanding what both teams wants to do and how well both of them execute this. Because this dragon can never be taken for free. Blue team is stronger, but they effectively can't blindly do dragon. They have to actively search for opportunities to do so. Granted, they do have push in the current state of the game, but between teleports, between control, between swaps on the map, between push control and wave management, the red team has a lot of possibility to completely contest and delay as much as they wanted the dragons being taken. So this is why it's so important that Trundle is proactive. Trundle needs to have his laners ahead so that the push and contention are as easy for him as possible, right? Because Twitch, after getting Bork level 6, he's gonna kill the spot lane. And if that starts happening, dragons will start getting very, very delayed. And Evia, level 6, starts getting a lot more shove into Ahri. Although Ahri does have some level of kill pressure, Udyr is a champion that is extremely good at protecting laners, especially with his current clear speed and scaling capabilities. So Trundle also will start losing more and more the matchup and the ability to move through mid. Sona, again, extremely good support that keeps her teammates alive as much as possible. So fights that dragon after Moonstone, which comes around 12 to 15 minutes, become incredibly more difficult. If even Ornn getting behind at around 24, 23 minutes, his items start coming up. It becomes so much more of a problem that it's going to be extremely hard for the Trundle team to actually be effective in the game. The best way Trundle truly has to do this is, again, play towards the bot side, control the enemy jungle as much as possible, and play on Sivir's early levels towards effectively shutting down the enemy lane. If they can delay this bot lane from being deadly, they have a very strong shot at winning the game. Coincidentally, the red side should be aware of this, and they say, okay, Ornn, you're on your own. You're gonna take care of yourself. If you're 50 CS down, you're 50 CS down. That's completely fine. We are gonna play to try and do dragons when we have the opportunity, and we know Trundle and the enemy laners aren't effectively being able to respond to this play. And we're going to do whatever we can to put these guys in a neutral position or an ahead position. Because if Twitch gets slightly ahead, it's doomed. It's completely just doomed. They cannot play the enemies cannot play the game if Twitch gets slightly ahead. Same goes for if he gets neutral. If he stays neutral in the game, it's just completely over once he gets to 3 items. Because he opens on Sivir and no one on the enemy can respond. And even if they play front to back, they have Anivia, Ornn, and Sona. So basically no one dies, damage is continuously being pumped into the enemies, and they can't really respond. The only true response is Sivir, but she can't be really an effective killer to these double strong tanks. While in response, both Renekton and Trundle not only have a gigantic difficulty playing against Twitch, they also have a big difficulty playing against Anivia and the zone control that she has. If the red team for some reason gets to an objective before the blue team, they can never get in. They can never pass through this, they can pass through this, they can pass through this, they can pass here, and they can't pass here. It is impossible for the blue team to effectively enter a zone controlled by the red team post one item. So that's also something that Trundle needs to be very aware of. All of the plays that Trundle does and all the setups Trundle does need to be made with 45 seconds to a minute in advance. Wards and position in this area needs to be done 45 minutes in advance. Lanes need to be pushed, that's completely fine. Both bot and mid can be pushed, and then both laners need to move into here. They need to control this area. And it's still going to be really hard maintaining this area, giving the enemy champions, but it's the best chance that they have with the comp that they have, that the enemies go on top of them to make a fight. Which becomes really difficult because it puts all the pressure on Trundle to always keep ahead of Udyr, a champion that farms quicker than him and moves around the map quicker than him. He is inevitably stronger than Udyr in the early game, but post one item, it's going to be really difficult for Trundle to play. So now that we understand what Trundle needs to do and how he wants to play the game, and how badly he needs to play for this, Udyr, we touched a bit during the ramblings, but Udyr kind of wants to do the same thing. He wants to full clear, get as strong as possible, as quickly as possible, and support his laners as quickly as possible. So, what are the best ways for him to do that? Well, the best possible way for him to make sure that his bot lane is as safe as possible, independent of what Trundle does, because he can't know what Trundle is going to do, right? He can objectively either get information using vision, either here or here, which is somewhat risky to place in the early stages of the game. Can be done, still somewhat risky, and the value of it is relative to Trundle's movement on the map. He also only understands that he wants to play for bot side, but there's a number of ways that Trundle can play for bot side. He can do 3 camps where he goes blue, gromp, and red into a gank or position into the enemy jungle, since he has prio on 2 lanes. He can do an effective full clear and just play a bit more safe and reliable, something that doesn't put him too much in a disadvantage if it fails. He can do an invade and play for level 3 fight here. Also a very strong possibility, where he zones you off here and then recalls and controls his own side of the map so Udyr can play. So Udyr is in a very difficult situation where he needs to choose what is his most effective and more lenient ways on which he wants to play the game. So, given that he doesn't have any information, going by experience or standardization are the two best options. So, going from experience is either you know how the champion behaves, so behavior, or by having studied the enemy and the champion that they play. But that's somewhat unreliable. That's not gonna, you know, function every time. It will help you at least at 75% of the times, but it's not, you know, truly always effective. The best effective way is to truly get eyes on him, understand where he is and what he wants to do. So again, vision here. This ward alone, if you enter S5, for example, or if you would just do this one, which is also relatively fine, gives you enough information to know what you want to play on. It's not perfect. Trundle can still do something like this into this into this, and you'll probably never see him. That's okay. You can ask for vision, you can, you can weigh your options with the vision that you have. But having these two words here, 90% of times, which is already much better than 75 of just, winging it, will give you the best option or the most correct option that that Trundle is gonna have. So, how does Udyr take this information? Well, he wants to play for bot side, always in coordination to what Trundle was gonna do. If Trundle decides to do 3 camping to invade, or if you, for some reason, Trundle starts on the red side, Udyr should start on his blue side. Seems a bit weird, but basically the idea that Udyr always wants to have is that he wants to mirror Trundle. Where Trundle is, Udyr wants to be there as well. It doesn't necessarily need to fight him, it's more a deterrent. It's like Trundle is coming, to top lane with a gun, but if Udyr comes and also with a gun, both exist on a standoff. It's a lot less likely that Trundle goes for a play if he knows that Udyr is there. Although he can play for a counter where he leaves some of his camps up to do a play on a side that Udyr isn't expecting him to be, creates an opportunity for Udyr to then invade and take his preferred side and take control of that side and get himself a bit ahead, and then he can just adjust what Trundle is doing. So the main idea that Udyr wants to do is just make Trundle not be able to play the game. You don't need to be hyper aggressive on this. You don't need to look for a ton of variation and opportunities. You basically just want to stop the enemy from being able to play. This is why it's really important that Udyr is such a fast jungler into dragons, for example. Being able to do a clear like this. I'm putting 5-6, but he can do these 2 camps at once. I'm gonna just dunk. And 7. He will effectively have a level up when they eventually meet here. Wherever Udyr goes, as long as he's mirroring Trundle, he will always get an advantage when they meet the first time. And that's something that's really important for Udyr, because he wants to keep that control over the enemy jungle consistent during the game. Because the only true way that Trundle beats and wins this game with his team is having pressure on bot lane. So as long as Udyr plays accordingly and plays really strongly, he can deny movement from mid. He can create space for Anivia to be a bit, a bit more wild in the early game and get to her power spike sooner. He creates a lot of space for Twitch as well, not allowing dives in this area by positioning himself on the same side as Trundle will try and probably dive them from. Even if Ari shows up on a 4v3, it's still advantageous to them. Not in the sense that they would win the fight, but they can escape more easily from it due to his presence. Diving three people, especially if one of them is stronger than most of the other champions that are diving, is really dangerous. There's always going to be trades, and that's still, and as long as there are trades and someone soaks the EXP, it's worth for the red team because the value of kills to them is much bigger than the enemies. Because it doesn't matter if like they die 20 times, but they still do the same amount of gold as if they've killed 20 times, you know? They don't mind dying as long as they get the gold that they want. And once they get that gold, it's just over. No one can do anything. And this mirror style is very natural for a lot of high power farm junglers to do. Karthus does it very often. Um, what's it called? Kindred to some extent does it very often, but she does it a bit different. Shyvana does it really well. What's an AD champion that does this as well? I can think of it on the top of my head, but I know there's a. I guess you can see Belvav does this to an extent as well. Yeah, but she plays a bit more towards this, which is not something that we're really talking about. Okay, so quick recap of this very despairing comp. We're gonna do more comps in a bit, so we can like condensate everything that we've been talking about. But in short, Trundle wants to play fast and loose. He wants to make pressure on the enemy jungle and the enemy bot lane, make sure that his lanes get ahead, and completely control the game and get dragons as soon as possible to command the game and control the game before the enemies get a chance to really contest it. On the other hand, Udyr wants to play responsive, make sure he stops anything that Trundle really tries to do, and make sure that he gives sustainability to his laners to have more freedom to what they want to do as well. So helps in this case helping Anivia with this mid matchup and helping Twitch versus dives until he's level 6 and able to generally play against Sivir. And it all matters on the dragon. The best case for Trundle in this game is to do a full clear outside of Raptors because it wastes too much time. Onto Scuttle with bot pressure, going into a rotation on the river to help him secure it against Udyr, which is slightly faster and would be level 4 versus level 3. Onto a recall, do get a Bami Cinder with the gold, or Sheen the boots if he goes boots, or at least he's gonna be going base with around 1k gold. But as long as he brings a sweeper in pink and one pink, it's completely fine. And then the items that he feels the best. If you want to go Sheen, if you want to go Kindle Gem, it's completely what's it called? Subjective to what you want to do. You go either into a positional top gank while your camps before going into your camps, because in case you see an opportunity. Having said this, be aware of your laners. Okay, once you've called for this play and you've got secured the crab, actually even before this, once you're doing this, once you've started doing this, you should call to your top laner as a Trundle to have the wave be here. Have him control it so it freezes here so you can guaranteedly have a guaranteed gank without losing any tempo. If for some reason he is unable to do this, well, first of all, having this control of the lane is troublesome that he can't. And second of all, it's completely fine if you can't, effectively gank top. Go into your jungle, go into bot side again, do full clear, get level 5, play towards bot and mid, ask for them to get some prio, initiate the dragon, and control it. Enemies should not be able to still effectively deny you it, and if you and you should play for a turn and not to flip the dragon. Always turn either into Twitch Sona or the Nivy itself. Leave Udyr be. It's way too complicated to catch him. If you can, good, and you can go for it, but try and go for targets that are much more immobile and easy to punish. And after getting first dragon, you can recall, do your camps. Once again, look into the top side to see if your top laner is freezing. If he's not freezing and he's pushed, Herald should be spawning in around 30 seconds, and you can take that with some vision. You don't. I would argue that you don't want your team to rotate here. You want to extend the laning phase of bot lane as much as possible. Wait. Okay, you want to do Herald, but you don't want your bot lane to rotate for it, okay? If the enemies respond to this Herald play by moving Twitch and Sona, don't be afraid to give Herald and tell your bot lane to push as hard as they can. It's completely worth it for them. It will give a lot more value to them than the enemies doing Herald itself. A Herald that they can't properly put down because all lanes are, in a hard position for them in terms of pushing. And you just respond to Udyr's movement as the Trundle to make the Herald to be the least effective possible. And yeah, that's the best things you can do as an Iron player. I feel like this is maybe it was a bit convoluted, but we're gonna try and go for the next example. Okay, that will give a bit more of an insight on what you want to do. Oh, another thing I want to mention on skilling compositions is how to effectively gain time on dragons. Well, you can't be caught, right? The main thing of giving early objectives is that you don't want to do it, but a lot of the times you don't really have an option, especially in a situation where you're playing against Sivir Yumi. You have to be very conscious that you don't have push. You don't. Okay, it's gonna be really hard to contest. It's gonna be really hard to probably play against it, but you do have solutions against it. One of the main solutions is controlling your waves earlier, right? So dragon spawns at 5. No one really is there precisely at 5, and you can always track the enemy jungler's movements. You can kind of understand where he is on the map by his movements and what he wants to do. So you pay attention to that. But the main thing you want to do is at 4:30, you should be completely in control of the lane. Even if it's, something out of your control and it's completely crashing into you, do your best to sustain the lane as much as you possibly can. If you are being shoved in really far up, so basically like you're stacked to, if you see that at like between 4 and 4:30, the enemies are freezing it here and stacking waves to crash into you, immediately call your jungler. Just, I don't care if he's topside, if he's got camps to do, he needs to be down here. This needs to be cleared as fast as possible, and you need to gain as much time as possible to bounce this wave back. You want to make sure that the enemies are not allowed to move. You need to prepare this a long time before the dragon even spawns. Be very aware of the timers that you have and that your team have. And the best way to do this is both first clear of your jungler, look at your wave, look at the enemy's wave, and try and predict and prepare where you want the wave to be. You should always have the push on the wave at 5:15. At 5:15, this wave, you should have 2 waves here pushing into this. Forcing the enemies to, give this and lose another 30 seconds to 1 minute trying to contest the wave and pushing it back. It should be more than a minute. It should be around 1 minute and 30 until they can effectively crash the wave back into you. But that's immediately more than enough time, right? Because at 5:15, you delay a minute, it becomes 6:45. I'm gonna write it a bit better. So it becomes 6:45. If they go for a dragon at 6:45, it's very awkward for them because their Trundle was ready at this timer, right? And if he wasn't, he's playing for the top side, so you have to change a bit of the timer. But this is what we were expecting and have information on the Trundle doing. So at 5:15, he was ready for dragon. He sat here, kind of saw the position of the wave, noticed that he can have his bot lane. You guys have prio. Udyr's bot side, he can't really do dragon. Recalls, goes into the top side, and does it. When it's finally okay to do dragon again, he's still not ready to really do it. He most likely is around 20 seconds delayed, even if he's really good, so this can become even bigger and bigger depending on how bad he is. Which basically means that at 7 is when his next opportunity to really play for the dragon is. And in the meantime, you can again delay this timer again by doing the same thing. See the wave pushing back into you, and you call for help to push it back in, creating another minute on where the enemy can't actually play the game. You can also, if you feel like it's really difficult for your jungler to come, or if it's really difficult for you to contest mid, in this situation of compositions, you can go mid and do the exact same thing. At 6:55 at least, your Anivia should be level 6. At level 6, she has a lot more pushing power, especially with TP, than Ari. So Udyr can easily hover around her to create a situation where Ari can't really contest the wave in any sensible way, making it so she's effectively stuck up here with a large wave. She can clear the wave relatively faster, but not fast enough that it allows her to genuinely do dragon. And if Anivia and Udyr move into this area, although then Sivir, even if Trundle is here, okay, has a really, really difficult time. Because she's pushing a wave, so it's around here pushing into you guys, but she's outnumbered and outpressured in the map. Because Anivia's around here, or let's say Udyr's around here, because this is a bit more, dangerous to be in as an Anivia, and Anivia's right here. It's in this side of the map, it's a 4v3. On a pushing wave. So they're not even safe to walk up. So what did they have to do? They have to give. And then the control goes entirely back to you guys until, Anivia in 15 seconds needs to go back in, which gives you more than enough time to fin out the wave. And Udyr can, go back into his jungle, and Trundle cannot respond. Because even if he stays here for the 15 seconds that he needs to, he's losing so much movement and positioning on the map that it's not even worth for him. And you, again, by these movements, control the enemy jungle again, control the priority on the dragon, and control the game. The only way that Sivir and Yumi can really contest is if they just brute force it. Or if they themselves understand what's going to happen on the wave and preemptively play towards it. Understanding that at the designated time of 5:15, the wave shouldn't be on your side, it should be on hers. So then she can push it out with 2 waves and go to dragon. Coincidentally, if you understand that the wave is over here at 5:15, you should call your jungle to help you defreeze this. If this keeps being frozen as and you can't help your deer contest the dragon, you're just gonna be completely fucked, and the game is just gonna completely be on the blue side. it's going to be a bit harder because blue side at 515 on this position has a lot more resources than you, especially since Ari on this timer can move around more freely. But it's your best possible chance to get back into a playable state of the game. And I know it feels really weird to say that in it's the only way that you can go back into a normal state of play into the game when it's 5 minutes in. But it's really this important in compositions such as this that you actively um, delay the game as much as possible. Because even a miss by 1 to 2 minutes can be detrimental. It can just completely make you lose the game. Of course, going into mid game, the game expands, becomes more broad. There's a lot more trades and there's a lot more plays that you can effectively do to mitigate these early losses in case they do happen. But you can at least have this basis of how to properly respond to them, to at least in this context against really aggro compositions. Depending on the composition, if it's a bit more defensive, you can still apply these styles. So this is going to be scaling versus aggro. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's really hard to make. I'm completely out of voice. Um, I hope at least it understands towards some understand. It gives some understanding to how um to play for this early dragon, not only on bot lane but also on mid lane, and what you effectively want to do as a jungler to properly respond to the movement that is happening on the map on both sides. Be it the aggro style, and where you have to be very loose and rapid and creative on how you want to approach the game, or the scaling defensive side that wants to understand what's going to happen on the game, predict it, and play accordingly to it, so you don't allow your enemy to really, explode. If you want to see a very good example of a game being controlled in such a way by an aggro composition, I recommend 2022 summer um, playoffs on LEC, Fnatic versus Misfits, game one. The way they played around Kalista was impeccable. It was perfectly demonstrated of what we talked here, and now putting the enemy bot lane behind can make such a big impact into the game. If you want to see something towards more of the scaling side of the situation, I recommend seeing either XL games of playoffs against Fnatic, both game 1 and 2, or Misfits game against Fnatic uh, on summer 2022 LEC playoffs. Game 2, where they picked Soraka, is an also very good game to understand how the scaling of Soraka shaped the entirety of the game, much like Sona and her scaling would shape the game here. So same as like the Twitch scaling and the Anivia scaling. But the idea is very similar to what was described here, and how both teams played it is very similar to what we described here. And I think it would be a really good approach to how a team can respond properly to it. So yeah, this would be the first part of the video. We'll release some other new uh, parts with different styles of comps to help you understand a bit more of it as well. So I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, share and leave a like. It's really appreciated, and I'll see you on the next one.